The sun hung low over Willow Creek, Virginia, painting the small town in hues of amber and gold as autumn leaves rustled in the breeze. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind where nothing much happened beyond the usual hum of daily life. Kids biking home from school, old-timers chatting outside the diner, and the occasional car rolling through Main Street. At the town's lone gas station, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the lot, its engine purring softly before cutting off. Behind the wheel was Eleanor Grayson, a woman in her late 40s with a calm demeanor and a navy coat that spoke of understated elegance. She stepped out, stretching her legs after hours on the road, and headed inside to grab a bottle of water. She had no idea that this simple stop would soon spiral into a confrontation that would change everything. Eleanor wasn't a local, and that was enough to catch the eye of Officer Daniel Hargrove. A 15-year veteran of the Willow Creek Police Department, Hargrove was parked across the street in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee and stewing over a morning of petty calls. Loitering teens, a false shoplifting alarm. He was tired, irritable, and quick to judge. Traits that had earned him a reputation around town as a cop who didn't mess around. When he spotted Eleanor's SUV, something about it set him off. The out-of-state plates, the sleek design, the way she carried herself as she walked into the gas station. To Hargrove, she didn't belong, and in his mind, that made her suspicious. He climbed out of his car, adjusted his belt, and marched across the street, his boots crunching on the gravel. Inside, Eleanor handed a few dollars to Jenny, the young cashier behind the counter, who offered a polite smile. As Eleanor turned to leave, Hargrove burst through the door, his presence filling the small space with tension. "Hey, you!" he barked, his voice sharp enough to make Jenny flinch. Eleanor stopped, turning to face him with a look of measured surprise. "Yes," she said, her tone steady but cautious. "What's your business here?" Hargrove demanded, stepping closer, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. He sized her up, her neat ponytail, her confident posture, and decided she didn't fit the profile of Willow Creek's usual crowd. "You don't look like you're from around here." "I'm just passing through," Eleanor replied, keeping her hand still. She'd dealt with enough small-town cops in her life to recognize the type. Overzealous, territorial, prone to seeing threats where there were none. "I stopped for water, that's all." Hargrove's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. "Passing through, huh? Let's see some ID." His tone was clipped, leaving no room for argument. Eleanor paused, not out of defiance, but because she could sense the situation teetering on a dangerous edge. She moved slowly, announcing her actions to avoid any misunderstanding. "I'm reaching for my wallet," she said, pulling out her driver's license and handing it over. Hargrove took it, glancing at the name, Eleanor Grayson, before tossing it back at her. It fluttered to the floor and she bent to pick it up, her patience wearing thin. "Grayson?" he muttered, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Sounds fancy. What's someone like you doing in a place like this?" The disdain in his voice was unmistakable, as if her very presence offended him. "I don't see how that's your concern," Eleanor said, straightening up. "I haven't broken any laws." Her words were calm but firm, a quiet challenge to his authority. That was a mistake in Hargrove's eyes. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone he'd already pegged as an outsider. His face darkened, and he stepped closer, his voice rising. "I decide what's my concern around here. You're acting suspicious, and I don't like it." By now, Jenny had retreated slightly behind the counter, her hands fidgeting nervously. Outside, a few locals had started to gather, drawn by the commotion. They lingered near their cars, watching as Hargrove's temper flared. Eleanor, however, stood her ground. She'd faced worse than this. Threats during her husband's early years with the FBI, hostile stares from strangers who resented his rise to power. She crossed her arms and met Hargrove's glare head-on. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said, her voice cutting through the growing tension. That pushed Hargrove over the edge. His pride couldn't handle it. Without warning, he drew his service weapon and aimed it at Eleanor's chest, his finger hovering near the trigger. "Get on the ground," he shouted, his voice echoing in the small store. Jenny gasped and ducked fully behind the counter, while the crowd outside stirred, some pulling out their phones to record. Eleanor's heart pounded, but she didn't move. She raised her hands slowly, her eyes locked on his. "You're making a mistake," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A very big one. Hargrove didn't know it yet, but he just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Eleanor Grayson wasn't just any traveler passing through. Her husband, James Grayson, was the newly appointed director of the FBI, a man who'd spent decades building a career on discipline and justice. Eleanor had stood by him through it all. Death threats, late-night stakeouts, the relentless scrutiny that came with his rise to the top. She wasn't about to let a small-town cop intimidate her, no matter how unsteady his grip on that gun might be. "My name is Eleanor Grayson," she announced, her voice steady despite the weapon trained on her. "My husband is James Grayson, director of the FBI. Lower your weapon, officer." The words hit Hargrove like a jolt, but his stubbornness held firm. "You expect me to believe that?" He scoffed, though a flicker of doubt crept into his eyes. "Prove it." Before Eleanor could respond, a voice called out from the crowd outside. "She's telling the truth!" It was Mike Tanner, a local mechanic who'd been pumping gas nearby. Mike's cousin worked security at FBI headquarters, and he'd seen Eleanor in a photo from a recent agency event. "That's the director's wife, Hargrove. You're done." The crowd buzzed, phones now capturing every second. Hargrove's confidence wavered, but he didn't lower the gun. Not yet. Eleanor seized the moment, moving with deliberate calm. "I'm reaching for my phone," she said, pulling it from her pocket and dialing James's private line, her gaze never leaving Hargrove's. The call connected, and James's voice came through, calm but tinged with concern. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" "James," she said, projecting her voice so Hargrove and the onlookers could hear. "I'm at a gas station in Willow Creek, Virginia. An officer named Daniel Hargrove is pointing a gun at me. I need you to handle this." There was a brief pause, then James's tone turned cold and commanding. "Put him on." Eleanor held out the phone. Hargrove, now pale and sweating, lowered his weapon and took it with a trembling hand. "Hello?" he stammered. "This is Director James Grayson," James said, his voice like steel. "Holster your weapon and step away from my wife. You've got 10 seconds, or I'll have agents there before you can blink. Understand?" Hargrove nodded mutely, shoving the gun back into its holster. He handed the phone back to Eleanor and backed away, his eyes darting to the crowd, who were now whispering furiously among themselves. "I didn't know," he mumbled, but Eleanor was already relaying the details to James, who promised to send help immediately. Within minutes, Hargrove's radio crackled to life. It was his sergeant, Tom Bradley, barking orders. "Hargrove, get back to the station, now!" The officer turned and trudged to his patrol car, the weight of his actions settling over him like a storm cloud. By the time he reached the Willow Creek Police Department, the news had spread like wildfire. Videos of the incident were already circulating online, racking up views and comments. The small station buzzed with tension as Hargrove walked in, his colleagues avoiding his gaze. Sergeant Bradley was waiting in the chief's office, arms crossed, while Chief Richard Evans sat behind his desk, rubbing his temples. "Sit down," Bradley growled. Hargrove slunk into a chair, his bravado gone. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Evans asked, his voice weary but firm. "I thought she was a threat," Hargrove muttered, barely audible. "She didn't look like she belonged." Bradley slammed a hand on the desk. "A threat? She was buying water. You pulled your gun because she didn't belong? Are you kidding me?" Evans raised a hand to calm his sergeant, then slid a folder across the desk. "We've had complaints about you before, Dan. Your attitude, the way you talk to people. We let it slide because you've been here 15 years. But this is over the line. The FBI director's wife." Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. "She didn't say who she was until—" Bradley cut him off. "Doesn't matter. You don't draw on an unarmed civilian without cause. We've got videos, plural, showing you escalating this for nothing." Evans leaned forward, his decision already made. "I just spoke to the mayor. The feds are on their way. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Badge and gun now." Hargrove's jaw dropped. "Terminated? No hearing?" Evans shook his head. "The evidence is online for the world to see. There's no coming back from this." Hargrove slid his badge across the desk, his hands shaking, and left the room in silence. By nightfall, Willow Creek was abuzz with activity. 2 FBI sedans rolled into town, agents fanning out to interview witnesses. Eleanor, now at a hotel in the next county, gave her statement over the phone, her composure intact. James arrived the next morning, his presence a quiet show of support for his wife, and a warning to anyone who might doubt the consequences. The story hit national news. Officer fired after confronting FBI director's wife at gunpoint. Locals grappled with the fallout, some defending Hargrove, others relieved to see him gone. The police department faced a review, with Chief Evans implementing new training to prevent another incident. Hargrove faded from sight, rumors suggesting he'd left the state, unable to face the town he'd once patrolled. For Eleanor and James, life moved on. She never spoke publicly about that day, but friends said it left her reflective. "If it could happen to me," she told one, "imagine what others go through." Willow Creek, too, carried on, its quiet streets forever marked by the day a cop's prejudice met its match and lost.